day started quite ordinarily in Dreamland. Kirby was chasing a butterfly and looking for his next snack. Meta Knight was watching over Kirby, making sure he was okay, as per usual, and the king was taking a nap near a tree as Bandana Waddle-Dee watched over the castle. Everything was peaceful. All the allies of Kirby were doing something that they typically would. It couldn't have been a nicer day for a certain mollusk after quite some time to come back to the planet.
Dreamland. It's been quite some time, hasn't it?
The snail said quietly to himself as he held a bag of his things on his back. Escargoon had left a long time ago, about 4 years to be exact. He separated from the king in his own best interest. They didn't leave on bad terms, but Escargoon wanted to try and earn degrees he had never gotten the chance to earn, and maybe gain his own life. Not that he really did. Things were very different without Dedede those few years. He had assumed that Dreamland had moved on without him by now, but decided it couldn't hurt to check out the old neighborhood. Escargoon began to walk the trails to Cappytown. A large sigh escaped him.
This place hasn't changed a bit, Minus a few small things, everything looks like when I had left.
He quietly spoke to himself. He was almost worried that when he went to town no one would remember him. The thought of that sent shivers down his spine. It sounded like the monster incident, except it was all real.
Surely someone will remember I used to be here with the king.
He spoke once more as he walked slowly. He closed his eyes a bit and enjoyed the gentle breeze as he walked. He really missed this place. Escargoon continued to walk to the peaceful sounds until he heard the loud sound of a familiar pink alien.
Fire!
He watched as he heard Kirby run up to him.
Kirby, you're still here? I thought the king would have gotten rid of you by now.
Escargoon exclaimed, sounding quite surprised, too, to see the pink orb running around. Kirby ran up to him and tackle-hugged him.
Fire! Fire!
Kirby said. The large smile was quite obvious. He couldn't have been happier to see him, despite all the schemes he and Dedede had pulled on him years ago. Escargoon began to smile as much as he hated to admit it. Seeing Kirby again was refreshing.
Oh, Kirby, it's great to see you alive and well.
Escargoon smiled as he gently lifted Kirby up in his arms.
Fire!
Kirby giggled gently as he was lifted up. Kirby jumped out of Escargoon's grasp.
Fire! Fire! Fire!
Kirby exclaimed as he seemed to be pointing at an area. Could it be that Kirby wanted Escargoon to follow him?
What is it, Kirby? What are you trying to tell me?
Escargoon asked, seeming quite confused. Kirby gently grabbed onto Escargoon's hand, pulling it towards where he wanted to go.
Fire! Fire!
He said, looking somewhat excited. Clearly, this small pink blob wanted Escargoon to be somewhere. Escargoon began to get gently pulled by Kirby as he ended up just walking next to him, holding his hand gently.
Kirby, you do realize I haven't been here in forever. I need to find a place that I can check into first.
Before Escargoon was finished, he was interrupted with another one of Kirby's typical sounds.
Fire!
Kirby said happily as he walked cheerfully to the spot. Escargoon sighed lightly, but smiled.
All right, let's go where you want first, I guess,
he said, walking along with him. Kirby had led Escargoon to a random tree. Escargoon, of course, was confused and not completely amused by this.
Kirby, I know you sleep in a tree, but for me, this is ridiculous.
Escargoon looked the tree up and down and looked back down at Kirby as he spoke. Kirby sat Escargoon down.
Fire! Fire! Fire!
He almost looked as if he was telling him to sit and wait. Escargoon understood and was unbelievably confused.
I mean, if you really want me to stay here, I can. Just don't leave me here for too long, Kirby!
Kirby started walking off and nodded to Escargoon as he walked away. He was obviously trying to get Escargoon to see something, or someone. And that was his plan exactly. Kirby had already gotten Escargoon just where he wanted him to be, safe and sound sitting down by the tree. He hoped he wouldn't walk off. He wanted to be sure this was perfect. He knew that if he could get this just right, it would be wonderful. He only had one shot at making this an excellent reunion. Kirby began to walk until he heard the loud snores of the Penguin King. Now all Kirby had to do was get him to follow, which might be tough, but Kirby liked the challenge. The king snored loudly, enjoying his nice nap by the tree. He was quite comfortable, until a small little pink puff crawled up onto his stomach.
Fire!
Kirby said, obviously trying to wake the king. At first, Dedede thought if he ignored him, he could continue sleeping. But that wasn't the case. Kirby began to hop up and down on him to wake him up. He wanted him to wake up and he made that very clear.
Alright. I get it, Kirby, I'm up.
DDD said, slowly sitting up and rubbing his eyes. Kirby smiled big as DDD opened his eyes to see him. Kirby sat in his lap and smiled big.
What do you want from me, you little pink marshmallow?
DDD asked, looking somewhat annoyed as he continued to rub his eyes. Kirby stood up and pulled on the king's robe as he pointed to where he wanted to go. King DDD looked up to where he wanted to go.
Over there? Right now? Come on, Kirby, I ain't got the time or the energy to walk all the way over there right now.
DDD said, sounding just a tad annoyed as he lied back down. Kirby pulled in his robe harder, making his point as the pull alone made DDD flip over.
Man, for a baby alien, you still are strong as anything.
DDD said as he gently lifted himself up from his fall. King DDD looked down to Kirby, who looked quite determined to get him to go to his tree.
Why do you want me to go over there anyway? This tree over here looks just like that one,
he said, looking irritated. Kirby just smiled and began to pull on his arm to follow him there. DDD let out a large, tired sigh.
Fine, I'll do this. But after, you owe me a meal, Kirby.
Kirby jumped a bit as he walked.
Fire!
He said, agreeing to a large meal. More for him than DDD, though. Escargoon gently sat and felt quite relaxed. He had to admit, Kirby left him in quite the nice place. It was quiet, the worry of people forgetting him after so long fading away.
Kirby does know the best place is to forget all his troubles. I'll give him that one.
Escargoon let out as he relaxed.
Though he said he would be right back. It's been a little while now.
He said, sounding somewhat worried for him.
Maybe I should go find the little guy. Who knows what trouble he could have gotten into.
Escargoon spoke to himself gently. He got up and looked around a little bit, though not far from the tree he had been sitting. King DDD and Kirby finally got to the spot. Kirby had been singing the whole way, and DDD, well, looked tired as always. From the long walk and Kirby's bad singing, of course.
I mean it, Kirby, whatever you want me to see, it better be worth that whole walking time, cause that was awful!
Kirby looked up to DDD and nodded in agreement, almost like a promise that it was worth his time. Kirby had looked, but Escargoon was not where he told him to be. Kirby got nervous. King DDD would be mad if he had no reason to come here. King DDD looked impatient.
Kirby, why am I here? Nothing here looks important at all!
Kirby had a nervous smile as he looked for Escargoon. King DDD watched him and tapped his foot anxiously.
Kirby, please don't tell me you brought me here for nothing, cause if you did, I swear to over
King DDD threatened, but was interrupted by the one voice he never would have expected to hear in that moment.
Your Majesty?
King Dedede turned around as fast as his body could move. There he was, after 4 years of him not being around. There he was, shell and all.
Escargoon?
King Dedede said lightly. It was the only words he could get out. He was in shock that he was here. He thought after he had left he would never come back. Dedede had so many emotions going through him in that moment, he had no idea what to do or say. And neither did Escargoon. Escargoon, upon seeing him again, began to feel emotional fast. It had been so long since he had gotten to see him, or touch him, or even hug him. He had no idea what to do with himself.
Long time no see, sire.
Escargoon felt the tears well up in his eyes. He was so happy he was crying. He figured the king would probably laugh at him for being emotional like he used to, or something of that manner, but the reaction he got was very different from his expectations.
Goonie!
Dedede yelled as he ran up to Escargoon and practically tackle-hugged him like Kirby had done. The only difference was this time, it was way heavier.
I missed you so much! I can't believe it's you! I can't believe you're back!
Dedede yelled out a bit, hugging Escargoon close to him. He was just as emotional as he allowed himself to cry too. Escargoon was surprised. He wasn't being made fun of or anything. The king was so happy. Escargoon wrapped his arms around Dedede's back with no hesitation.
I missed you too, sire. I missed you so much!
Escargoon choked out as he cried lightly into his robe. Dedede hugged him tighter in response, still crying like a baby. But at that point, Dedede didn't care. Escargoon, his friend, his partner in crime, his everything was back.
Looks like you haven't changed a bit, Goonie.
Escargoon looked up at Dedede. His smile couldn't have been bigger at that moment.
Good. I was hoping you would stay while you were gone.
Dedede smiled gently, still being a bit loud because of the excitement of seeing him again. Dedede saying how happy he was about him being the same made Escargoon cry even more.
Oh, your majesty!
He yelped out once more, holding him close again. Dedede gently lifted him up in his arms and laughed a bit as he twirled around in joy.
I'm just so happy to see you again, Goody Goo!
Escargoon, who would typically not allow him being picked up this high, allowed it just this once. He had never been this respected or missed. This felt amazing for him, truly amazing.
You too, sire. I can't be any more glad right now,
he said loudly and cheerfully, still crying due to all the emotions, but he was better than ever. Dedede tossed him up in the air, which freaked Escargoon out a little until Dedede caught him and started to hug him again. Escargoon felt as safe as he had felt in his arms. Kirby smiled big. His plan had succeeded at long last. The devious duo was back together again. Kirby hoped that after such a long time, maybe the two wouldn't be as mean to him. From the looks of it, the two had already seemed to be better than a few years ago. The two already treated him better separately, so surely together the two would treat him even better. He hoped for that anyway. But who knew what future brought for him and the duo? For now, Kirby watched them be happy and smiled as he watched. King Dedede put Escargoon down and wiped one of the tears from Escargoon's eyes.
Guess we still as emotional as we used to be, huh?
Dedede spoke in a sweet, joking way. Escargoon smiled back, not crying as much, but a little.
I suppose so. At least I am.
Escargoon said, looking away a bit. Dedede smiled, patting the Moloch's head.
It's okay, Goonie Goo Goo. I like you the way you are, tears and all.
He spoke sweetly. Escargoon looked at Dedede, wiped another tear away from his own eye.
Thank you, your majesty.
Escargoon spoke softly.
Anytime, old buddy. Hey, you got anywhere you gotta be right now?
Dedede asked Escargoon, wondering if this was only a visit or perhaps a moving in kind of deal.
Actually, no. I just got back. I need to find a place to rent and such. You know, the basics of a place to live.
Escargoon spoke gently as he looked up to his king. King Dedede smiled wide.
Hey, here's an idea. Why don't you move back into the castle? I mean, we rebuilt the whole thing like it used to be. Except bigger, but you get the picture.
Dedede said, as he scratched the back of his head nervously. Escargoon smiled even bigger now.
Of course I'll come back,
he said gratefully. Dedede grabbed Escargoon's hand.
Well, come on then. Let's get you all set up. We could even have a party for your whole returning thing.
Escargoon nodded in agreement and followed Dedede.
You can come too, Kirby.
Escargoon yelled out to Kirby. Kirby jumped up in excitement as he ran over to them.
Poya!
He yelled out, as he hopped onto Escargoon's shell as they walked to the castle. Escargoon stared down at his hand and Dedede's. He felt his cheek get hot as he looked away from his king. He finally felt at home. He was finally home. King Dedede slammed the castle door open.
Here it is, home sweet home!
Dedede yelled out happily. As Escargoon entered the all-too-familiar castle, it all looked like it did before it was destroyed. He was too happy everything was still where it belonged.
Wow! How did you replicate the entire castle to look like how it used to?
Escargoon asked, sounding amazed at what Dedede had been able to do. Dedede shyly looked away.
Well, it wasn't just me. I had a hand from the Waddle Dees and stuff.
Escargoon smiled as he looked around the castle.
Oh, it looks amazing! I can't believe it's all back!
King Dedede smiled lightly at the sight of Escargoon being so thrilled to see the castle again. He had missed him being around a lot. Seeing him so excited to be home made him feel great.
So, Goon, obviously you gotta get all settled in. I gotta get all your stuff ready for your little special party later.
Dedede exclaimed as he walked to Escargoon.
You really don't have to throw me a whole party.
Escargoon said shyly.
No, my mind's made up. We are having a party to welcome you back.
Dedede insisted. Escargoon giggled a bit in response.
Now, I know we are cutting our time together a little short, but I gotta get things ready. But I have someone who will show you around and get you reacquainted with the place.
Dedede stood proudly as he spoke. Dedede made a hand motion beckoning Bandana Waddle Dee to come over. Bandana Waddle Dee marched over and opened his eyes.
Yes, sire.
Escargoon, this is my bodyguard Bandana Waddle Dee. He runs most of the castle's protection. He always knows the place real well, so I'ma leave most of the reintroducifying to him.
Dedede exclaimed, trying to sound intelligent.
Well, I gotta go. This party ain't gonna plan itself. See you in a bit, Goonie.
Dedede said as he waddled off. Escargoon waved goodbye as he watched him walk off. He turned to Bandana Waddle-Dee.
So, you're gonna show me around the place, right?
Escargoon asked shyly.
Yes, sir. I will show you most of the new things around here, since you already know all the old stuff.
Bandana Waddle-Dee spoke proudly.
Please follow me,
he said as he began to walk. Escargoon followed behind Bandana Waddle-Dee. He couldn't believe how well the place ran. He probably should have guessed someone like Bandana could run this place so well.
So, how long have you been working for the king?
Escargoon asked as he followed behind.
Approximately 3 years. I have been helping him run the place. He has trouble on his own,
Bandana said, turning back to Escargoon. Escargoon smirked a bit.
You got that one right,
he said as he let out a small chuckle. Bandana loosened up a bit and chuckled too. He had just met Escargoon, but he already felt like family. I mean, he knew the king in the same way he did, so he could accept him as a part of the Dedede clan.
Well, for the most part, everything is the same, except the extra bedrooms. We all have new guest rooms for anyone who needs them, and a pool, but that was Dedede's decision.
Bandana spoke casually. Escargoon nodded his head, focusing on every word.
We did always want to get a pool. Glad we were finally able to get that. Anything else?
Escargoon asked.
Nothing much. Oh, except that the king's room is bigger. He requested that part.
Escargoon figured Dedede would want a bigger room. The castle was 2 times bigger now, so I guess he wanted to expand everything. Not a bad idea on Dedede's part. Bandana Waddle-Dee opened the door to Escargoon's new room. It was huge, so much space, and the bed was so large that they could fit 5 snails on it if they wanted. Escargoon was practically starstruck.
This is amazing! Look at all the space and all the stuff, and I just can't believe this room is mine!
Escargoon spouted out in joy and complete awe. Bandana Waddle-Dee nodded in response.
Yes, it is one of our finest rooms. The king told me to give you this one. He figured you would like it.
Escargoon smiled big.
Like it? I love it!
He said as he jumped onto the bed. Bandana grinned a bit.
I'm glad you like it. Well, I will leave you to unpack and make yourself at home. And Escargoon, it was nice meeting you. We should get to know each other once you are settled in.
Bandana Waddle-Dee said before shutting the door.
Will do!
Escargoon yelled back. Once the door closed, Escargoon lied back on the bed. He knew he had to unpack and get ready in a bit, but he felt like he deserved to bask in the moment. He knew this was the start of his life, beginning to become a whole lot more exciting. Escargoon heard a small knock at the door and his eyes shot open. He had fallen asleep on his new bed? Oh no, how late had it gotten?
Escargoon, are you in there?
A familiar voice called out.
Yes? What do you need, Bandana T?
Escargoon let out a nervous laugh, trying to collect his thoughts from just waking up.
Just wanted to let you know the party is starting in 10 minutes, so please do come out soon.
Bandana D said as he stood next to the door waiting for the snail to respond.
Of course. I'll be right out.
Escargoon said, sounding somewhat frantic.
Okay, see you there.
Bandana D yelled out as he walked off. Escargoon practically bounced out of bed and felt himself go into a panic. How could he have been so stupid? He forgot they were throwing a party for him, not to mention slept for hours.
I can't believe I forgot to do the most simple task and put all my things away!
Escargoon said to himself as he rushed to help put all his things in the right place. Escargoon knew from the stuff he had brought and the fact he would have to get ready for the party, 10 minutes was not enough time. He held his own head, fearful he wouldn't have enough time to get everything done.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff you got there.
A voice called out from the door. Escargoon looked up from his mini panic attack to see a cat-like creature, wearing what looked like a blue and white robe with a bow tie. Probably for the party, he assumed.
Would you like some help? You seem pretty overwhelmed.
The cat spoke as he floated over. Escargoon nodded gently in agreement. He didn't expect anyone to see him in this state. He was just happy it wasn't Dedede.
Thank you for this. This means a lot.
Escargoon said, looking somewhat embarrassed at his own freak-out.
No problem, friend. Always happy to help. Oh, where are my manners? I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Magalore.
The cat said in a kind manner, offering his hand out as a greeting. Escargoon noticed his hand wasn't attached to his body at all, which freaked him out quite a bit, but he went along with it and shook his hand.
Well, I had heard a lot of noise in this room, and my curiosity was piqued. Wasn't expecting to see the guest of honor in such a rush.
Megalore said jokingly, hoping to bring some light into the situation.
Yeah, not the look I really wanted to give out.
Escargoon chuckled, nervously scratching the back of his head. Megalor looked back to him.
You do know me helping you is supposed to give you time to get ready, right?
He said politely. Escargoon started to feel frantic again as he realized he had to get ready.
Right!
He said as he dashed to get his suit on and get all pampered. Megalor continued to neatly put most of Escargoon's things in a place where it would be safe and look nice around his room. As Escargoon put on his suit and tie, he figured he might as well find out who the feline who helped him even was.
So, how do you know the king, Megalor?
Escargoon asked, his voice sounding somewhat breathy from rushing to finish getting ready.
Well, it's a long story, but to make it simple, I met Kirby and his friends quite some time ago and messed up kinda bad. But made up for my mistakes and now live right next to the castle in my ship.
Megalor explained as he put something down in the drawer. Escargoon kept looking at himself in the mirror, getting all pampered up.
Is it okay to ask what you did, or would that be too forward?
Escargoon asked, looking to the cat-like creature. Megalor still looked somewhat happy, but at the same time guilty as he sighed a bit.
Well, I wanted an artifact and it turned me evil. I ended up hurting Kirby and his pals. I still feel bad about it sometimes. But that's in the past now.
Megalor smiled by the end. Escargoon nodded a bit.
Well, I'm happy everything went so well for you.
Escargoon smiled, before tying his own bow tie. Megalor looked at everything he had put away and smiled to himself.
All done, and it looks like you're all ready to go, too.
Megalor said, looking Escargoon up and down. Escargoon grinned in return.
Yep, and with time to spare. Albeit 2 minutes, but it's time.
Escargoon said, sounding somewhat exasperated. Megalor pat the snail on the back.
Give us some credit. We're already and good to go. Now do come out in a bit soon. Everyone's waiting, you know.
Escargoon got a tad shy at the thought of everyone waiting to see him. This was all so new to him.
Megalor, where did you run off to?
A voice called out from the throne room.
Oh, gotta get going. I'll see you there, Escargoon, and good luck out there.
Megalor said as he floated out of Escargoon's room.
Thank you!
Escargoon called to the egg-shaped creature once more before looking in the mirror.
It's showtime, Escargoon. But please don't be a fool out there.
He said to himself before walking out of this room. He took one more look at himself before closing the door. He just hoped he was worth a party of this caliber. Escargoon began to walk out of his room and into the bustling main room of the castle. Some faces familiar to him, yet some new. He was an introvert, so being here with so many people freaked the snail out, but he knew he had to pull through. Besides, Dedede and everyone pulled this all off in such a short time, just because he was moving back into town. Sure, the anxiety of making a fool of himself was there, but he decided to ignore it, and try to have a nice time. He deserved it after all. The first to greet him was none other than the pink blob himself, who was wearing a small light yellow bow tie. He hopped up and down in excitement. All the food and people around must have been making him excited.
You seem pretty happy, Kirby. Though, you always are, so no surprises here.
Kirby responded in a happy nod. He began to drag Escargoon closer to the main area rather than the sidelines. This, of course, made Escargoon nervous, but Kirby gave him a tight, reassuring grip in his hand. That made it okay.
Ah, there you are, Escargoon. I was worried you were not going to make it for a little bit there.
Bandana D said jokingly as he sat at the table. Escargoon laughed nervously.
I almost didn't.
He said, holding his own shoulder.
Nonsense. You made it just in time. No need to worry about it, Escargoon.
Megalor said as he flew up to the table they were all sitting on and sat down. Escargoon sat down as well, gently lifting Kirby into a seat near him.
I guess so.
Escargoon said shyly, wanting to make himself smaller by the moment. Talking to two people alone was already a lot for him to take.
Well, it is good to have you back in Dreamland, Escargoon.
Meta Knight said as he appeared as if from nowhere in a seat next to Megalor. Escargoon looked surprised at Meta Knight's sudden appearance. He had forgotten how he could do that.
Ah, yes, Meta Knight. I should have known you'd want to make an entrance.
Megalor spoke as he turned to the knight.
Not an entrance, just a quick way of transportation.
Meta Knight spoke matter-of-factly.
But of course.
Megalor nodded in agreement to the knight's statement. Escargoon was having trouble finding words to say despite being the focus of the party. He was happy to see some of the people he hadn't seen in years, but he was still crazy nervous.
Anyways, how have y'all been since I left?
Escargoon spouted out, not being quite sure what else would be a good conversation starter.
We, for the most part, have been fine. Much has changed, yet much has stayed the same. And you?
Meta Knight asked in a polite manner. Escargoon smiled weakly.
It has been okay, to say the least. Not as interesting as living here, that's for sure.
Bandana spoke up once more.
Well, surely you learned Huns while you were away, but I'm sure you really missed home as well.
Escargoon nodded, his weak smile staying on his face. King Dedede, after quite some time of not speaking, lost in his own thoughts, decided to say something after seeing how Escargoon was clearly feeling.
But there's no reason to miss home now, 'cause, well, you're here.
Dedede empathized. Escargoon's weak smile turned into a more normal smile as he looked up to Dedede.
You're right. It's just gonna take some time to get used to it is all.
Escargoon answered, looking like he was feeling better.
Yeah, it's great that he's back and everything. Not that I know him. Anyway, someone pass the cupcakes?
A pink orb wearing a jester hat from across the table spoke.
Now, Marks, where are your manners? Our new companion just came back from a long trip. You should at least try to be a little nicer.
Magalor scolded as he looked at Marks from across the table. Escargoon had no clue who the guy was, but it was obvious he wasn't exactly a nice person.
It would be nicer if I could have a cupcake, but no arms, so I'm limited.
Marks mocked in his sarcastic way. Dedede shot Marks a glare before Kirby reached over the table to hand Marks one of the cupcakes.
Ah, thank you, Kirby. See, this is the real best guy over here.
Marks grinned as he took a bite of the treat. Kirby just smiled and responded as he always would.
Fire!
Escargoon smiled at Kirby's optimism. It was nice to see, even when times were rough, Kirby can stay happy. Escargoon had only wished he could be that good with people. Everyone proceeded to start talking again with one another. Escargoon stayed somewhat quiet. To Escargoon's surprise, so did Dedede. He looked like he was in really deep thought once more. It was odd for him to be acting this way. Maybe it was just him trying to block all the so-called commoners out or something. Yeah, that was it. He didn't want to bother Dedede. Despite him wanting to talk to him more, Escargoon got off the table and began to look around to see who else was at the party. Who knew what else or who else he might walk into? As Escargoon began to walk around the party, he still felt his anxiety bubbling up from being around so many other people. Some people he knew and was happy to see again. Others were all new people who had no idea who he was, but were happy to see him regardless. But his own nerves would not allow him to enjoy the party. I mean, of course, he was happy everyone cared about him, making him the center of attention. But it was still odd for him. It was too hard to take in.
Sorry we're late,
a voice called out from the front door.
Ah, Tiff. Tough. I was wondering when you two would be coming. Usually Tiff would not allow herself to be this late,
Meta Knight said, as he watched the siblings walk into the party.
Yes, well, I prefer not to be this tardy, but Tuff took forever to put on a suit.
Tiff growled as she walked to the table, her brother following behind her.
It was uncomfortable, Tiff. It hurt my neck. Bow ties were always a problem for me.
Tuff murmured as he leaned on the table.
Tuff, you are not a child anymore. You are 14. You should at least be reasonable enough to put on a tie.
Tiff bellowed in complete annoyance at her brother's lack of know-how. Tuff shrugged it off, but felt that he at least needed to defend himself.
Well, you're 16, and you still talk like a bratty little 7-year-old.
Tuff mocked. Tiff growled to herself once more. Meta Knight obviously knew he had to cool off the situation, so he did just that.
You two, there are no reason to argue over such a petty problem. You both are somewhat immature in some ways, but you both have matured a lot as well,
Meta Knight explained.
Guess so.
The siblings said in unison as they glared away from each other.
Wow, Meta Knight, you sure do know how to put people in line.
Magalor beamed as a visible blush could be seen under his scarf.
Yeah, why don't you two just get it over with and kiss already? Yeesh.
Marks teased as he kept eating his cupcake. Magalor shot Marks a long glare as Meta Knight looked away blushing through his mask lightly.
I'm just saying, there are sparks there.
Marks suggested, closing his eyes as he spoke.
This situation isn't about that, Marks.
Magalor snarled as he clenched his teeth. Meta Knight cleared his throat. Before speaking, a blush still under his mask.
Correct. This party isn't about me or Magalor. It's about Escargoon, who we should allow to have his moment in the spotlight.
Meta Knight let out, sounding a little less composed than usual out of shyness from the comment.
I agree. Escargoon is the one this whole party is for. He should get the most attention.
Bandana D replied, sounding quite professional. As the others began to talk again, Escargoon decided to say hello to those two siblings that used to annoy him so. but they looked like they had changed a lot since the last time he saw them.
But wow, you guys look really different.
Escargoon sputtered out, not quite sure what else to say to them.
Well, yeah, last time you saw me, I was as short as Kirby.
Tuff commented, looking very chill in his leading position.
That's 'cause he sprouted up very fast. He complained the whole time it was happening.
Tiff teased, talking in her usual bratty way.
Did not!
Tuff replied, sounding peeved by her comment. Escargoon actually chuckled at this.
You two haven't changed a bit.
Escargoon smiled. Tuff began to babble a bit back.
Yeah, you haven't changed much either. Man, I remember when you used to get angry at us for even being around.
Tuff responded as Tiff was quick to talk next.
Right. It's been so long, I forgot how you used to treat me, Tuff and Kirby. But you seem to have warmed up to Kirby and hopefully us too?
Tiff hesitated, wondering if Escargoon still wasn't a fan of them. Escargoon smiled as he looked away from the two.
Well, I don't mind you too much now. You guys aren't loud, annoying kids anymore. No offense.
Escargoon trailed off. Tuff smirked a bit.
We don't care, it was a long time ago. But I mean, I'm just wondering how you and Dedede are doing now after so long.
Tiff nodded in agreement.
Yeah, I mean, when you last left off, he was always clobbering you and dragging you around like a personal punching bag.
Escargoon felt a shiver go down his spine thinking about those days. The king had quite a temper back then.
Well, I can assure you, he's not doing that now. At least I think he isn't.
Escargoon supposed.
I hope so. What he used to do with you back then was uncalled for.
Tiff scolded. Tuff messed with Tiff's hair before talking once more.
Yeah, it was crazy for you two back then. Remember all those times we'd chase you with a hammer and stuff?
Tuff chuckled, remembering that as quite funny. Escargoon thought otherwise. It wasn't funny at all. It hurt a lot back then, to be chased around and sometimes clobbered.
Yeah, that happened. And I'm not fond of those memories. Surely that will not happen anymore, though.
Escargoon shuddered out at the thought of that kind of thing happening again.
You never know. He might be behind you with a hammer right now!
Tuff teased as Escargoon frantically looked behind him. When he realized Dedede wasn't there, he felt like quite the fool.
Tuff, quit it! That's not funny!
Tiff barked at her brother to stop his teasing. Tuff just laughed and walked off.
It's not funny and you are not clever, you half-pints!
Escargoon yelled out as he walked off. What the three didn't know was that King Dedede had heard the whole conversation. King Dedede had just kind of stared from one of the corners of the castle as all of that was being said. It was quite obvious. He was not happy with those thoughts being brought to Escargoon and scaring him with it as well. All these memories he didn't want brought up seemed to come back like karma. King Dedede ended up watching over Escargoon a bit more before leaving the main area completely. No one seemed to notice he disappeared. As Escargoon was trying to relax after the little joke, Tuff decided to pull. Kirby decided to run up to Escargoon once more.
Boya boya!
Kirby announced, grabbing onto Escargoon's hand.
What is it now, Kirby?
Escargoon asked, smiling weakly.
Boya boya boya!
Kirby asked. Obviously, Escargoon had no clue what he was saying. Meta Knight proceeded to translate.
He is asking you to follow him. He has a surprise for you, Escargoon.
Meta Knight replied. Escargoon's eyes widened a bit in surprise. That did sound interesting.
Oh, okay then, Kirby. Lead me to it then.
Escargoon smiled sweetly at the young Star Warrior as he was pulled into another room of the castle.
I just hope the surprise isn't a room full of strangers.
Escargoon thought as he was pulled. Who knew what Kirby had in store for the mollusk? Kirby continued dragging Escargoon around the castle, skipping around looking for a specific room. Escargoon looked completely confused as he was pulled, a few of the partygoers following along.
He has no idea what's about to happen.
Magolor giggled as he flew near Meta Knight. A small chuckle escaped Meta Knight, which caused Magolor to blush once more.
He will be quite surprised, won't he?
Meta Knight answered, seeming somewhat excited, but not too noticeable. Only to Magolor. Marks glared over to the two and smirked.
I see you took my advice, Magolor.
Magolor's face got bright red as he glared over, staying close to Meta Knight. Meta Knight glared as well and proceeded to speak once more.
Marks, our conversations are none of your business.
Meta Knight said calmly. Marks smirked more in response.
Yeah, none of my business. Sure.
Marks teased as he walked in front of the others. Bandana D walked in his bodyguard stance.
Marks, I highly suggest you do not make fun of one of our finest knights.
Bandana D opened one eye to look at Marks.
What's the problem with a little playing around? I mean, look at him! Come on!
Magalor sighed and stayed near Meta Knight still, looking somewhat embarrassed. Meta Knight noticed how he was feeling and proceeded to gently grab Magalor's hand reassuringly. The moment Magalor felt his hand being held, his face turned all hot pink, as Meta Knight shyly looked away once more, just hoping it made him feel better about Marks' silly teasing. Bandana D looked over from the two holding hands back to Marks, who looked cocky as ever.
Well, it's still not right to tease them.
Marks ignored Bandana D as he walked in front of him. In the back of the whole group, following Kirby and Escargoon, was Tuff and a very annoyed Tiff. Tiff scolded as she looked away from her brother. Tuff knew she was annoyed and decided to comment.
What, Tiff? You're making that face again?
Tuff inquired, looking annoyed at his sister and her obvious gestures.
Oh, nothing.
Tiff said, sounding particularly ticked off. Tuff huffed a bit and started to get just as annoyed as his sister.
Look, Tiff, what I said back there was a joke! Nothing more than some harmless fun!
Tuff defended himself the best way he knew how. Of course, his sister had something to say in return.
It wasn't funny. He was scared, Tuff, and it was your fault for making a joke like that and making him so uncomfortable.
Tiff began to tell off her brother for his actions.
Well, maybe Escargoon shouldn't have been a stick in the mud and took it for what it was, a joke!
Tuff yelled out, sounding annoyed because of all the accusing. Tiff just sighed loudly as she walked after a few minutes before she spoke again.
Wasn't right to do that to him. That's all I'm saying.
Tuff sighed loudly.
Fine. Later I'll apologize.
He spoke quietly, admitting defeat. Tiff nodded and smiled.
Good. It's the right thing to do.
She smiled as he walked, as Tuff, in an agitated way, followed behind. Kirby had led Escargoon to a large room in the palace with a very big window in the room. It was mostly empty. Escargoon assumed this room was saved for special occasions.
Kirby, why'd you leave me in here?
Escargoon wondered as he looked around the room. Kirby stood facing Escargoon, looking almost like as if he were waiting for the others to come in to begin his little plan. Escargoon stood there watching everyone walk inside. He felt a tad bit nervous, feeling himself sweat a bit. What was everyone planning? What was even going on? Kirby, after seeing everyone, had walked in, began to speak.
Boya, 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 boya.
Escargoon stared down at the pink puff, having no clue what he was saying.
Boya, boya, boya.
Kirby asked, his eyes looking very hopeful staring at Escargoon. Escargoon knew he was being asked a question, and a very important one at that. Only problem, he had no clue what the question was. Meta Knight stepped up to explain, seeing the snail was in total confusion.
Well, Escargoon, what Kirby is saying in a nutshell is that he has seen that you have changed very much, and he is proud of how much you have tried to become a better person.
Escargoon smiled nervously in response.
I'm really not that great, but, thanks, Kirby.
Kirby nodded and waited for Meta Knight to explain the rest.
He has asked you if you want to become one of his friends, or as we call it, one of the Star Allies.
Meta Knight announced, trying to make it sound as exciting as he could, so that Kirby would be happy. Escargoon's eyes widened, still confused but intrigued.
Star Ally?
Escargoon asked, confused.
A star ally is someone who basically goes on adventures with Kirby, who helps him out and stuff. But basically, it's like an official title of one of Kirby's best friends.
Mark spoke loudly as he stepped up.
Everyone who becomes a Star Ally has a small star badge that is given to them, see?
Megalor beamed as he showed off his star badge. Everyone else around showed their star badges as well. Escargoon was touched. Kirby wanted him as an ally? Escargoon looked down to see Kirby holding up the badge, offering for Escargoon to take it.
Will you be my star ally?
Kirby attempted to speak out, hoping Escargoon would now full-on get what he meant. Escargoon felt tears well up in his eyes as he stared down at the badge. He gently took it out of Kirby's hand, making soft weeping sounds as he looked at it. He put it on his suit and smiled lightly.
Yes, of course I will, Kirby.
Escargoon let out as he held Kirby up in his arms. Kirby laughed as he was picked up and held by Escargoon. His smile was wider than it had ever been. The others gave him a round of applause as they watched. It was truly a beautiful sight to see. Escargoon continued to hug Kirby, smiling as tears fell from his face.
Thank you, Kirby. This means everything to me. Everything.
It had been a few hours after Escargoon had become one of the Star Allies. The party had continued on for a good 4 to 5 hours afterwards. Escargoon even started to enjoy himself through this time, no longer as tense. Everyone had begun to leave now and go home because nightfall had come and even Dreamlanders needed some sleep.
Great party, guys! I had a blast despite not being able to reach the food.
Marx declared as he walked out of the castle doors to head home. Escargoon waved goodbye to Marx as Magolor and Meta Knight walked to the door as well.
I would say this party has been quite fun. I hope you enjoyed it, Escargoon.
Meta Knight commented as he held Magolor's hand, offering to take him home.
We should do this again sometime, Escargoon. It was quite the pleasure getting to know you tonight.
Magolor added as he winked at Escargoon in a playful way. He proceeded to float off with Meta Knight as Escargoon waved goodbye to them as well. Escargoon watched them walk off, feeling kinda sad it was all over. He felt something tug on his suit before closing the door. It was Kirby, who looked kinda sad he had to go as well. Kirby gently said as he looked at Escargoon, his eyes filled with tears.
Don't worry, Kirby. I'll see you tomorrow. I promise.
Escargoon consoled him as he went down to Kirby's level of height. Kirby smiled and hugged him one more time before running off to his house. Escargoon sighed happily as he watched him run home.
He really is a ball of positive energy, isn't he?
He smiled as he closed the door to the front of the castle.
Well, I suppose you should go back to your room and head in for the night.
Bandanity suggested as Escargoon walked back in. Escargoon sighed lightly.
I suppose I should.
Escargoon spoke softly, sounding quite satisfied, but something didn't feel correct. Almost like something was missing from the night. Like a piece of the puzzle was missing, an important piece. I mean, he had seen everyone at the party had a great time. Even became a Star Ally, so what was missing? He had spent time with everyone. Except... Escargoon's eyes grew wide, realizing who he had forgotten. Dedede. He had noticed how quiet he was being, but just left him alone, and after that, he was just... gone. Escargoon nervously let his own eyes dart around a bit, before turning back to Bandanity. Bandanity noticed that Escargoon hadn't left yet, which worried him.
Escargoon? Are you okay?
Bandanity questioned, walking up to the now worried mollusk. Escargoon quickly turned around to ask a question.
Where did Dedede go during the party?
Escargoon asked desperately. Bandanity stopped to think to where the king had gone.
Well, the king is. He is. I don't know where he went.
Escargoon had begun to get more worried now. Had he been kidnapped? Or was he planning something against Kirby? Is he okay? His brain started to run wild with where he could be and what could be happening to him. Escargoon thought, if Dedede were planning something, there was only one person he would call. Escargoon began to walk to the throne room, and once he got there, looked to the buttons on the throne. The all-too-familiar buttons they used to press when they needed a monster.
I don't suggest you do that. That's for Dedede only.
Bandanity called out as he ran over, trying to stop Escargoon from trying anything. Escargoon, however, ignored that as he clicked the button. A large TV screen began to unfold and appear in front of the mollusk. Bandanity, the moment it began to appear, he ran and hid behind a pillar. He couldn't lie, it scared him a lot. The TV screen flickered and showed static for a moment before revealing the Nightmare Enterprises' most trusted salesman.
Hello there, Triple D. Oh, it's you.
CS sounded not very surprised to see the snail after so long. Escargoon looked up to the screen, somewhat expressionless.
Has Dedede called you to order any monsters?
The snail asked, as serious as his voice could make him sound.
Whoa, getting to that already? I haven't even gotten to welcome you back to Dreamland properly, you loony goon. It's been quite some time. Good to see you're doing fine and dandy.
CS examined as he spoke clearly and professionally before being interrupted by the snail once more.
Answer my question. Has he ordered any monsters from you recently?
Escargoon growled as he spoke, just wanting his answer so he could hang up. CS smirked.
Just skipping to the good part, Well, no, he hasn't ordered any since you invaded Nightmare Enterprises. Why do you ask?
CS's curiosity was piqued by this question. Escargoon looked away from the screen, his fists clenched.
What is he planning to try on his own, then?
Escargoon shuddered, only thinking about what he would try to do scared him.
He really can't do much without our assistance, to be quite honest. Without us, he's a monster owner with no monsters.
CS said matter-of-factly. Escargoon turned his head back to him fast.
He can handle himself well without you! He doesn't need your crummy monsters!
Escargoon snapped at him a bit for even making fun of Dedede at the moment. This was not a joke to Escargoon, it was serious. C.S.'s smirk stayed on his face.
How would you know? You weren't here for 4 years. You don't know if he made it well without us, or even you.
C.S. inquired, looking quite devious as he spoke, obviously trying to rile Escargoon up, which sadly was working quite well.
You don't have the right to say that about me, or my king!
Escargoon barked out, getting closer to the screen angrily. C.S. shrugged a bit.
My point still stands. You've only been back for a day now. You do not know what he's been through for 4 years. Neither do I. But hey, who knows? It sounds like he's moved on without you.
Before C.S. could finish, Escargoon hung up on him by smashing his hand on the button seen on the throne. And then he was silent for a moment, before putting his hands in front of his face and allowing himself to whimper. The thought of the king moving on without him was too much for him to take. He cared about the king too much to allow that. Bandanity couldn't stand to watch him do this to himself.
Escargoon.
Bandanity walked up to him, putting a hand on his shoulder. Escargoon just ended up hugging Bandanity, crying out as he did so. He needed anyone to hold him at the moment. Of course, he would have preferred it to be the king, but a supportive friend was enough to make him feel somewhat better.
Escargoon, what he said was not true. Take it from the person who has been here for the 4 years when you were not.
Bandanity consoled the snail, stroking his back, hoping it would soothe him. Escargoon only continued to whimper.
Then where is he? Why'd he disappear, other than the fact that he doesn't want to see me?
Escargoon spoke softly in Bandanity's arms.
Escargoon, that's not even close to his thoughts on you. In fact, they are the opposite.
Bandanity spoke softly back, saying what he hoped would console him, but also the truth. Escargoon looked up at him, letting him go to speak.
What do you mean by the opposite?
He asked as he let his tears gently fall out of his eyes. Bandanity sighed and looked away for a moment before saying words that could explain everything.
It's time I tell you the truth about what he thinks of you, Escargoon.
Bandana Waddle Dee stared up at Escargoon, seeing his face, desperate, awaiting answers. He knew he couldn't hide what the king thought of him, despite the king definitely not wanting him to say this information, especially to Escargoon. In fact, he made him promise not to say it, but it was either Escargoon having a panic attack and not being alright, or him just telling him the truth he deserved to know. Bandanity sat gently on the floor before letting out a long, stressed-out sigh.
The king's feelings on you are hard to explain. You should sit down for this, Escargoon.
Bandanity looked up to the snail, from where he had sat waiting for him to sit next to him. Escargoon sat down gently, still looking depressed by the thought of the king's feelings on him being negative. Bandanity had to just say it so Escargoon could be okay and stop worrying.
The king has talked about you since you left. In fact, you were one of the only things he would talk about. At least to me.
Escargoon felt himself tense up from the shock of that. The king missed him? He'd acted like he didn't even care when he left. Was it all a facade he put on when he was leaving?
He talks about me? All the time? What do you mean?
Escargoon stuttered.
All the time, to me and the other Waddle Dees. He would talk about how great you were. How you were the only person who truly understood him.
Bandanity explained, making many hand motions as he spoke. Escargoon felt his heart rate go faster as all this was said. The king never said any of this to him. Never. But he supposed that the king had too much pride to show the softer sides of his personality.
How did he even function when I left? When I walked away from the castle, he was just waving with a blank look on his face. I thought he didn't care that I'd left.
Escargoon went on, looking at the ground as he spoke his mind.
You didn't see him when you were out of sight. He had stared there for a good 30 minutes before. Well, crying his eyes out.
Bandanity confessed, sounding nervous to admit this about the king. Escargoon began to tear up again as his eyes widened once more. He was terrible at controlling his emotions at moments like this.
He cried? Just because I had left?
The snail said, his voice sounding choked up. Bandanity nodded before continuing to explain.
Me and the other Waddle Dees have comforted him for months over it. He never really got over it. He later just kept it to himself. Well, mostly to himself. I was the only one he would tell everything to about it.
Escargoon listened, not believing what he was hearing.
What did he say about me?
The snail sobbed lightly.
He said a lot. The things that I guess stood out to me was how much he said he regretted doing to you and saying to you. He would always say if he could take back anything he had done, he would do it. That's what he would take back.
Bandanity uttered gently. Escargoon was so floored by all this news. It was so much for him to take in one sitting, but he just needed to hear more of the true feelings of Dedede. He had to know the truth.
What else did he say?
The mollusk asked, trying to focus, but having trouble.
He always talked about how much he missed you, how much he just wanted to hear your voice again. Even your whining about something. That would just make him happy. At least, that's what he said, and those were his words.
No one had ever thought of him like this before. It was so much for Escargoon to handle, he had trouble taking it all in. His tears proved that.
My voice? He always said I was annoying.
Escargoon wept. Bandanity wrapped an arm around the mollusk to comfort him.
He said it was something he couldn't live without. So your voice, it couldn't have been that annoying to him if that was the case.
Bandanity added as he looked up at Escargoon reassuringly.
I just can't believe he actually cares about me. Is there anything else I should know?
Escargoon asked once more. Bandanity smiled, sadly.
Yeah, he would always say, well, before I say this, I want you to know, this may hit you a bit hard.
Bandanity confessed, going to hold Escargoon's hand, hoping it would cushion the blow. Escargoon wiped the tears off his face before responding.
I'll be okay. I just have to know.
Bandanity nodded and closed his eyes.
He would always say, I need him. I can't live without him. There's so much I wish I told him before he left. There's so much I wish I hadn't hid from him. If I had a chance to just make him come back, I would. I would do it better. I would be better. I just want him to come back to me. I want him to come back home. To me.
Bandanity's voice grew weaker by the end, sounding saddened by that comment as well. Escargoon couldn't keep his emotions at bay anymore. It was too much. Just picturing the king saying that, sounding so broken and alone. Worst part was he wouldn't have done that if he had stayed. But he had no idea he had cared so much. He had no idea because Dedede never showed this to him. How was he supposed to know he wasn't okay? How was he supposed to help him if he didn't let him in? Escargoon covered his face once more, crying harder than before. Bandanity held his hand softly. Bandanity tried to console him, hoping he would be okay.
Why didn't he tell me? I could have helped him. He needed someone. He just left me in the dark.
Escargoon cried, lifting his head up, sounding hurt. Bandanity thought for a moment.
I mean, it's not too late to help him.
Bandanity suggested. Escargoon's pupils became smaller, realizing he was right. He can help him now. He needs him now. Escargoon stood up, tears still dripping down his face.
Where do you think Dedede would be right now?
Escargoon asked, his voice sounding choked up but confident. Bandanity stood up as well.
Well, the place he normally goes to think is the balcony of the castle. That's your best bet.
The small bodyguard inquired. Escargoon pat Bandanity's head before beginning to walk off.
Thank you, Bandana. You've helped me a lot. I'm about to fix all this. I promise.
Escargoon said, looking to Bandanity as he opened the door to leave the room. Bandanity smiled a bit.
Good luck, Escargoon.
The bandana-wearing D spoke out before watching the mollusk close the door. Once the door was closed, Escargoon bolted for the stairs. If he remembered where all the rooms where Dedede was, all the way to the top, he was willing to run for it. He wanted to get to him as fast as possible. He needed someone as much as he was going to deny it. He could lie and lie and lie, but Escargoon knew that Dedede needed to speak to him and him alone. He had to know what he needed to say, even if it meant forcing the truth out of him. He had to, for the sake of the king, for the sake of himself, for the sake of the two as a whole. Escargoon wiped his own tears off his face as he ran up to get to him. In what felt like a second, he made it to the king's room. He opened the door softly, which was surprisingly unlocked. He gently walked up to the door, which led to the balcony. He opened it up, and a gust of wind hit his face as he opened the doors. He shut his eyes in response. He opened his eyes after the wind had stopped blowing in his face to see Dedede standing there, back turned from him. Dedede turned his head gently to see who opened it.
Well, guess you found me. Thought you weren't even gonna come looking, to be honest. I wouldn't have blamed you if you didn't.
A weak smile on the king's face as he looked to him.
Sire, please, listen to me for a moment. I I need your full attention.
The snail let out, sounding as confident as he could.
If that's what you want, Goonie, I'm all ears.
Escargoon took a step closer to Dedede, getting ready to speak his mind. It was actually hard even taking a step closer. Dedede had an energy to him at that moment that made it hard to approach him.
Sire, why did you disappear like that? I want to know why.
Escargoon stuttered, attempting to sound like nothing was up and he didn't know anything. Dedede sighed lightly, looking away from him, back still turned.
You're afraid of me, ain't you?
He grunted, his voice sounding very broken. Escargoon wasn't expecting that. I mean, Dedede was quite the scary person if he wanted to be, but he didn't fear him as much as he used to. A small part of him feared when he would get mad at someone, but that was it.
No, sire, I'm not scared of you.
Escargoon stood confidently as he said that.
If I walked up to you right now, you would back up. You're still afraid of me, Goonie, don't lie.
Dedede grunted out again, still refusing to look at him. Escargoon began to tense up in anger.
Sire, I'm not afraid of you! You do not scare me!
The snail snarled, trying to get his point across. Dedede, in response, swiftly turned to him in a fast motion, his face being blank, very emotionless. Escargoon jumped back, a small squeak escaping him. He had done what Dedede expected him to do.
See, I was right. You are afraid.
The king verified, still looking emotionless, before he began to feel his facade break.
I'm a monster, ain't I?
The king let out as tears in his eyes began to show themselves. Escargoon was surprised. He very quickly responded.
No, sire, that's not true!
He yelled out to him, hoping he would just listen.
Yes, I am! I still scare you! I'm scarred you for life, Escargoon!
Dedede's voice shaking as he spoke, the king turned away once more.
I don't deserve you, Goonie. You can do way better than me. I don't even know why you look forward to seeing me again.
Dedede sobbed softly. Escargoon tried to stay calm, but was having some trouble with doing so. He walked closer to Dedede.
You didn't scar me. That was years ago. I'm not worried about that anymore.
Escargoon replied. King Dedede shook his head in response.
How you even have the heart to forgive me? I deserve to never see you again. That's the only punishment that's fitting for all the things I did to you.
Escargoon was floored by all this. He knew his behavior back then was horrible. He was still beating himself up about it.
Sire, please just stop hurting yourself over this. It's been 4 years. Things have changed between us.
Escargoon yelped out, grabbing onto the king's sleeve cuff. King Dedede looked down at the mollusk. He felt his whole body tighten up, thinking of what he had done to him back then. How much pain he must have been in because of him. It practically haunted him.
It's not okay. I never cleared it all up. I never fixed nothing. I never told you.
Dedede whimpered softly. Escargoon grabbed even tighter onto the sleeve cuff of the king's robes.
Then just tell me! Stop bottling it all up! I don't want to be left in the dark about all the things that hurt you, sire! Just tell me what's hurting you so I can help you through it!
Escargoon called out, just hoping Dedede would open up to him. Dedede looked away once more before turning to the mollusk, swiftly holding both his hands in his own.
I'm sorry, Escargoon! I'm sorry for everything! Everything!
Dedede wailed out, shutting his eyes as he did so, allowing the tears to just flow out of him at that point.
I was so stupid. I only realized how much I'd done to you when you left. I thought about it. I just wanted to call to tell you, but I thought you moved on. I knew if you did, you wouldn't want me there.
Escargoon held Dedede's hand softly in return.
Sire,
Before Escargoon could say a word, Dedede continued on.
It's okay if you don't ever want to talk to me again after this. I understand why you wouldn't. But I wanted you to know how sorry I am and how much I regret doing it all. I changed so much so I could become better. For me, for Kirby, and for you too. But just figured I'd let you know all that. Sire, please just let me speak for a moment.
Escargoon stumbled a bit. All of this was a lot. Like a lot on him. Dedede gently held him steady with one hand as the snail began to speak.
I forgive you, Your Majesty. I talked to Bandanity about you. He told me everything. About how much he missed me, my voice, my help, my everything.
Escargoon empathized, holding the king's hands gently. Dedede was astonished. He had told him everything? He knew it all? Dedede stared down at the snail looking anxious, knowing they still had so much to discuss.
You told me how much you couldn't live without me. How much you just wanted me home.
Escargoon lamented, his voice suddenly beginning to sound very similar to Dedede's, very choked up. Suddenly, Dedede felt the snail's familiar touch wrapped around in a hug.
Sire, I missed you too. I can't live without you either. It was so painful not being with you. I thought about you every day.
Escargoon wailed out into Dedede. Dedede continued to let himself open up to Escargoon and cry along with him.
I'm just so happy you didn't forget about me, Goonie.
Dedede sobbed, wrapping his arms around Escargoon tightly. Escargoon softly smiled as he cried.
I can never forget you. You remember the vow we made? We vowed to never be apart. And even though we were apart for a short time, we came back together, just like we had promised.
Escargoon confirmed, smiling, remembering the day they made that vow. Dedede chuckled as he wept.
You remembered. I thought you forgot about that whole thing.
Dedede smiled warmly. Escargoon continued to hug Dedede, not wanting to let go.
I can never forget about that day. It was one of the best days of my life.
Escargoon spoke softly, resting his head onto the penguin. King Dedede smiled, still crying, but not as much anymore.
Goonie, can I show you something?
Dedede asked softly, looking down at the snail.
Sure, Kingy.
Escargoon looked up to the king before hesitantly letting him go. Dedede began to lean gently onto the balcony and pointed to a spot with one hand and held Escargoon's hand in the other. Escargoon felt his cheeks get hot as Dedede grabbed onto his hand, but he looked to where he had pointed. Before, because of all the emotions, he couldn't see what a beautiful night it was. The stars were all visible in the sky, and the moon lit up the kingdom perfectly. It was quite nice, though. Escargoon didn't understand what Dedede had been pointing at, though. Dedede began to explain, looking out to where he pointed.
Every night I would come out here and watch that spot right there since you had left. Because I remember watching you leave from that very spot. I always watched it, hoping one time when I stared at it, I would see you coming back.
Dedede spoke softly as he rested one hand on the balcony.
Ain't it ironic? The one time I wasn't looking, you came home.
Dedede chuckled in a melancholic way. Escargoon stared out at the spot now, his eyes not being able to look away.
Your Majesty, I had no idea you were so thoughtful about these little things.
Escargoon spoke softly as he looked out, gripping onto the king's hand.
Well, there's a lot of things you don't know about me yet. But we got all the time in the world for that now.
Dedede looked down to his companion to see that familiar smile stare back at him. Escargoon sighed softly.
I suppose this takes care of all those bottled up feelings you've been having recently, Your Majesty.
Escargoon asked, smiling sweetly as he looked up to his king. King Dedede looked down for a moment.
Well, that's some of it. Not all of it yet, but...
Dedede pondered, speaking quietly. Escargoon continued to look at Dedede, now wondering what his brain was up to.
What is it, sire?
The snail asked, wondering what else the king wanted to confess.
Well, Escargoon, there's something I gotta get off my chest.
Dedede had proceeded to fidget in place after saying that. It was quite obvious that he had a lot more to say.
I mean, only if you want to hear more of this kind of stuff tonight. We can just talk more tomorrow if it's too much right now. I mean, I've probably kept you up all night anyways.
Dedede sputtered out, knowing it was obviously too late and Escargoon was probably tired.
No, it's fine. I won't lie. I took a long nap before the party. Not to mention, I missed staying up like this.
Escargoon admitted softly, looking out the balcony. Dedede looked down at Escargoon, wondering why he had missed it.
I didn't stay up like this when I had left. I always just went to sleep early, 'cause school and stuff. What you would find boring, sire.
Escargoon smirked a bit, looking up at Dedede, joking just a little.
I missed being up late with you. I almost wanted you to somehow be there to wake me up for one of your dumb reasons.
Escargoon confessed, looking out again. Dedede stared at Escargoon longingly. He had felt bad he couldn't be there for him at those moments.
Guessing you missed me as much as I missed you.
Dedede muttered softly. Escargoon smiled sadly in return.
Yeah, life wasn't the same without you. I'm just happy to be here, home with you. If it were my choice, I would never let this night end.
Escargoon said as he continued to look at the night sky. Dedede wanted to hold his hand again, but hesitated a bit.
Goonie, there is one thing I have to tell you tonight, then. I have to get it off my chest.
Dedede sputtered, sounding nervous. More nervous than Escargoon ever would, which was odd for the king, obviously. Escargoon noticed how odd it was the moment he looked at him, but pretended like he didn't notice.
Well, we have tons of time tonight, so you can tell me whenever you want.
Escargoon calmly answered, staring out at the night sky. Dedede nervously fidgeted once more before beginning to speak again.
When you left, it had me thinking a lot about you. Not just the way I treated you, but other things about us as well.
Dedede stuttered, trying to keep his cool.
I started thinking about how you would hug me when you're scared, and how you would take care of me like I was so special, and I just...
Dedede attempted to admit something, but just couldn't get the words out. He was stuttering and sweating as he was. A mess. Escargoon kept noticing it, but didn't want to call it out and make it worse.
Yes, I acted like that back then, and I still would. What about it?
Escargoon asked, now really curious as to why Dedede was acting like this. Dedede looked away from Escargoon, shyly now scratching the back of his head.
What I'm trying to say is, throughout that time of us being together every single day, there was something I wanted to tell you, and I didn't. And I regret just not opening my trap to just tell you this.
Dedede turned to Escargoon and gently took his hand. He took a deep, shaky breath.
Escargoon, I think I'm in love with you.
Dedede confessed, looking into Escargoon's eyes, having trouble keeping his eyes on him.
No, you know, I don't think I am. I know I am, and I have been for a long time. I hope you feel the same.
Dedede let out, sounding more nervous than he ever had. A noticeable blush had grown on the penguin's face. Dedede was even shaking out of how nervous he was for Escargoon's response. Escargoon was shocked. He had never thought this would happen. Dedede confessing to him? He always thought it would be the other way around. Escargoon felt his cheeks heat up and fast, same for the tears now running down his face. This time, though, they were not sad tears. They were the type of tears that were not uncommon when he was around Dedede. The happiest kind.
I love you too, sire.
Escargoon let out before holding Dedede's hands back tightly, reassuring him everything was okay. Dedede began to feel himself tear up again.
If I'm being honest with you, I did not expect to cry this much tonight.
Dedede said, softly wiping his own eyes on his robe. Escargoon suddenly went in to hug him, which surprised Dedede a bit, but he ended up hugging the snail back regardless.
I loved you back then too. A lot, sire. I was scared he would find out back then and, well, make fun of me.
Escargoon empathized as he held onto Dedede as tight as he could, just enjoying this moment as much as he could. Dedede spoke up again, pulling Escargoon a bit so he could look at him.
Make fun of you? I wouldn't do that to you. You feel into something you can't change, Goonie. Same for me too, in this case.
Dedede smiled, looking at Escargoon. This close made him so happy, especially the fact Escargoon was smiling.
I was just worried that you would. I thought you'd call me weird or something for it.
Escargoon chuckled, tears still running down his face. Dedede wiped them off of Escargoon's eyes.
I can't call you weird for that. I felt like that too.
Dedede spoke softly, gently caressing his cheek with one hand. Escargoon began to chuckle and then sunk into his hand a bit.
I never thought I would be able to ever be near you like this.
Escargoon muttered, letting himself practically sink into Dedede's hand as his eyes shut. The blush on Dedede's got much bigger at seeing this. Escargoon's face blushed just as hard. Dedede actually had trouble doing anything at that moment except looking at Escargoon. Escargoon opened his eyes to see Dedede's eyes locked on him. Escargoon smiled in return.
You can't look away, can you?
The snail asked shyly. Dedede shook his own head to try to not be so entranced by how cute the mollusk was.
It's hard to, but I can.
Dedede stuttered as he looked away from Escargoon. Escargoon laughed before hugging him once more.
You big softy. I knew you would fall in love sometime, Dedede. I'm just happy you fell in love with me.
Escargoon spoke as he buried himself into the crook of Dedede's neck as he hugged him. Dedede smiled before hugging him back. Dedede had thought, as he held him close. He had been told since he was a kid how life is short, fall in love. He had even thought for a while he had lost that so-called love he thought he'd found. But in the end, through all the good and bad times, here it was, the love he always wanted in his arms, holding him close, not ever wanting to let go. Dedede just smiled more, letting himself cry as much as he needed to. This was his moment, their moment at that. They deserved to just sit there and enjoy it for as long as they wanted. Everything the two could ever want or need was there, and it wasn't going anywhere. Not ever again. The newly made couple had been sitting there, holding each other in that close embrace for quite some time after that little talk. The two had obviously enjoyed this night and continued to through that moment. Dedede opened his eyes to still be holding his snail companion.
So, was this the best party you ever had, Goonie?
Dedede asked softly, holding onto the mollusk's shell, keeping him balanced in his arms. The snail, however, did not answer.
Goonie?
Dedede asked, wondering why he got no response. Dedede shifted Escargoon over a bit, only to see he had fallen asleep in his arms. Escargoon was just breathing in and out gently, smiling softly as he slept. Dedede didn't want to wake him up, but at the same time, still want to talk to him more. He didn't want this night to end just yet, but Escargoon looked so cute when he slept. Dedede softly shook his shoulder to try to nudge him to wake up.
Huh?
Escargoon grunted, waking up softly.
Hey, Sunshine, you fell asleep on me.
Dedede smirked a little as he teased a bit.
Sorry, I was really comfortable on you, Your Majesty.
Escargoon spoke gently, rubbing his eye from being woken up. Dedede gently patted the mollusk's head before he spoke once more.
I'm glad you were making yourself comfy. I was too. If it's too late for you to be up, we can just, go our separate ways for the night.
Dedede supposed, not sounding completely sure if that was what he wanted at the moment. If Dedede was being honest with himself, he wanted Escargoon to stay more than anything at that moment.
Well, I don't have to go just so I can sleep, sire.
Escargoon smiled gently at his king.
I'll just try to stay up, it's fine.
The snail yawned. Dedede knew Escargoon was exhausted from the long day he had, but wasn't going to bed because of him.
Look, Goonie, let's call it a night. You look real tired.
Dedede empathized, trying to get the snail to go get some rest. Escargoon grabbed onto Dedede's suit.
But I don't want to have to sleep without you, sire. I did just get you back.
Escargoon testified, not wanting to leave Dedede's side even for the night. Dedede looked into the snail's big green eyes. They practically begged him to let him stay with him.
Do you want to just sleep in my room with me then? Well, we can talk till you fall asleep and stuff if you want.
Dedede asked, hoping it would make Escargoon happy.
Actually, as much as I like my room, Majesty, I would much rather just share a room with you if that's okay.
Escargoon returned a question with another, hoping that he would get a yes.
Sure, that's okay with me. My room's big enough to hold all your stuff. But let's not worry about all that tonight. Let's just think about getting some shut-eye and maybe talking a little more, while we can.
Dedede softly exclaimed, keeping the conversation calm. Escargoon nodded in agreement as he gently lifted himself off of the king to stand up.
I suppose we should head in now.
Escargoon exclaimed.
Yeah, guess we should.
Dedede stood up, holding Escargoon's hand as he did so. The two began to walk back in and took one last look at the night sky before closing the doors to the balcony. They would both never ever forget how beautiful that night was. As the two headed in, they realized they were both still wearing their suits.
Hey Goon, that thing getting a bit uncomfortable for you?
Dedede asked as Escargoon looked down at his suit.
A little. I've been wearing it all night at the party, no? I even ran up the stairs with it on.
Escargoon chuckled a little at the thought of how long they had been wearing their formal attire.
Well, I'm getting changed out of these stuffy clothes for bed over there. No peeking, okay?
Dedede teased as he walked behind his changing doors.
I won't.
Escargoon chuckled once more as he walked over to the dresser. Escargoon began to take off his suit and fold it up neatly as he put it on the dresser. He made sure his star pin was safe on the top of the suit, clipped onto the front, as it was all night. Escargoon smiled at it once more before walking away from the suit as he waited on Dedede.
Are you ready to sleep, Your Majesty?
Escargoon called out. Dedede walked out, wearing only his signature robe, and that only.
All ready!
Dedede announced as he threw his suit lazily onto the changing doors. Dedede and Escargoon both walked to the left and right sides of the bed and both gently slid in. The two felt a tad bit shy, even though they had slept in the same bed before. Suppose it was the newfound love doing so.
So, I guess we just sleep now?
Dedede asked as he turned onto his side to look at Escargoon.
Well, no, we don't have to sleep yet. We can still talk a little more.
Escargoon smiled softly, resting his head on the soft pillow as he turned to face his king.
Well, what you want to talk about?
Dedede asked sweetly.
Here's a good question. How did you get a bed this big and this comfortable? This bed feels amazing.
Escargoon grinned as he sunk into the bed a bit, feeling more and more comfortable by the second.
Lots of money I happened to get off NME. And keep it between us, they don't know I took nothing.
Dedede smirked as he looked to the snail that was his lover.
Dedede, that's so devious. I knew you still did a few crummy things.
Escargoon smirked, knowing how Dedede acted. Dedede just smirked again before sighing happily.
Let me ask you something now. How are you so cute?
Dedede asked as he put a hand on the snail's cheek. Escargoon giggled softly before answering.
My jeans?
The snail blushed as he answered.
But Goonie, you don't wear pants.
Dedede answered, clearly not thinking of the same word. Escargoon just chuckled in response as he shifted closer to Dedede so he could hold him close again.
You are the cutest and yet the dumbest person I've ever met, Dedede.
Escargoon grinned, looking up at his king as he felt himself get sleepy.
I know. Ain't that something?
Dedede smiled as he now looked like he was ready to fall asleep as well.
Guess we should find this sleep now, huh?
Dedede said as he felt his eyes grow heavy staring at Escargoon.
Wait, there's one more thing I have to do before this night ends.
Escargoon said gently as he inched even closer. He put both his hands on Dedede's cheeks and pulled him in for a gentle kiss on the lips. Or, well, beak. Dedede was a bit surprised by this, but smiled gently as it all happened. Escargoon was right. That was the last thing this night needed. They both blushed as it all went down. They held the kiss for as long as they could, before having to let go to breathe. After they stopped, the two breathed, gently looking into each other's eyes.
That was amazing.
Dedede let out between breaths.
That was all I needed to make this night perfect. I love you so much, Dedede.
Escargoon let out in between his own breaths as well. Dedede wrapped both arms around Escargoon before speaking again.
I love you too, Goonie. I love you so much that I got more stuff planned for you tomorrow. We gonna do anything you want. It's gonna be great. That sound good?
Dedede asked, looking down at Escargoon, who looked sleepy as ever.
Yes, Sire. That sounds great. But now I just want to sleep here with you.
Escargoon spoke gently.
Okay. Night-night, Escargoon.
Dedede said, shutting his eyes and drifting off to sleep slowly. Escargoon grinned before shutting his eyes too and gently muttering.
Nighty-night, Dedede.
As those last good nights were said, the two had fallen asleep in the most comfortable way they could. They both hadn't slept this well in quite some time. The fact they were together must have let them sleep with ease. And so, the tale ends here. The missing ally was never truly missing, because in the end he came home, and was not forgotten, replaced, or anything of the sort. He was welcomed back with open arms by the old comrades and the new. He was loved by the ones he always wanted to be with, and most importantly, is now known as Escargoon, Kirby's newest star ally. The end.
Birds on a wire. One tries to fly away, and the other watches it close from that wire. He says he wants to as well, but he is a liar. I'll believe it all. There's nothing I won't understand. I'll believe it all. I won't let go of your hand. never going to let go of that wire. He says that he will, but he's just a liar. Two birds on a wire. One tries to fly away, and the other watches him close from that wire. He says he wants to as well, but he is a liar. Two birds on a wire. One tries to fly away,